Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little uncanny. You step through the moss-damp ruins of Byland Abbey, where stories say hooded monks wander long after their bones went cold. You can almost feel the chill rising straight from the flagstones, like the building itself is breathing frost into the air. A thin moon hangs over the arches, and for a moment you swear you hear cloth sliding across stone, even though you and I both know that if anything actually did glide past you in these shadows, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As always, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the half-collapsed nave, moonlight painting pale bars across the broken floor. Somewhere above, a lone owl gives a sleepy hoot, the sound echoing like an accidental sound effect for dramatic tension. The legend begins the moment you take a single step forward, the story of the ghost monk of Byland. A tale so old that villagers stopped questioning whether it was superstition or just Tuesday. The story goes like this. A single cloaked monk, face hidden and shoulders slumped, was seen drifting across the abbey grounds, always following the same path. He'd glide from the western gate toward the monk's dormitory, never turning his head, never acknowledging anyone, not even the brave or very bored medieval farmers who tried shouting at him. What made people nervous wasn't just the sightings, but how predictable the pattern was. He moved like someone still stuck in his monastic routine. You creep forward as that image forms in your mind, imagining the soft swish of his robes brushing the stone. People in the 14th century insisted the ghost appeared at least a dozen times. A local miller even claimed the apparition passed straight through his horse, which bolted so fast that it ran home without him. Honestly, that's a reaction you can respect. Most medieval people barely had health insurance. Outrunning spirits was a survival skill. But here's where the legend starts leaning into truth. When archaeologists began surveying the site in the 20th century, they uncovered hidden burials directly beneath the abbey floors, exactly along the path the ghost was said to walk. These weren't ordinary graves either. Many were unmarked, squeezed close together, clearly belonging to monks who died during periods of disease or famine. One burial even had a rosary pressed into the ribcage, which is either deeply symbolic or the medieval version of forgetting your phone in your pocket. The fact that these graves lined up with the ghost's known trajectory made historians raise an eyebrow. This wasn't just spooky coincidence, it suggested, that people had been witnessing something real, even if they misunderstood it. Medieval folk often located a spirit's haunting path based on ground that felt hollow or unstable. Since buried bodies shift the soil for centuries, it's possible villagers literally felt the hidden graves beneath their feet and built ghost stories around that eerie sensation. Still, there's a quirky twist. In one written account from the abbey, a monk recorded seeing a hooded figure who told him, "I am suffering beyond measure. Reveal my secret, and I will be freed." Which sounds dramatic until you realize the supposed secret was simply that the monk had been buried without the proper prayers. Historians still argue whether this line was meant literally or whether it was an internal monastery memo disguised as a supernatural anecdote. Medieval monks loved metaphors almost as much as they loved collecting relics. Someone probably received a withering lecture for sloppy record-keeping, and a ghost story was the easiest way to get everyone's attention. You trail your fingers across the rough stone walls as the story continues, imagining how the cloister must have looked when it was whole, chilly corridors. The smell of candle smoke, the repetitive rhythm of monastic chants drifting into the night like a living heartbeat. And according to the legend, right at the heart of that heartbeat was a hidden chamber where certain monks were laid to rest unseen by the world. People long believed this chamber was made up, a bedtime story for scaring novices into following the rules. Except surprise, it turned out to be real. Excavations in the 1922 revealed a sealed crypt room beneath the chapter house. Inside were clustered skeletons arranged with an odd level of care, almost as if someone wanted them to rest together, but out of sight. One burial even had a lead cross tucked beneath the skull. Scholars aren't sure what that means. Maybe honor, maybe secrecy, maybe a medieval attempt at ghost-proofing. You can imagine the proto-Ghostbusters of the 1300s saying, "Just put more metal near his face. That should do it." As you wander deeper into the ruins, the wind slips through the arches with a whispering tone. Not quite words, but almost like chanting from very far away. You pause, half enjoying the spooky drama, half wondering why every abandoned religious site has such perfect acoustics. A mainstream historical fact makes this even better. Byland Abbey actually holds one of the earliest surviving English ghost stories, written by monks themselves. They chronicled sightings of spirits, not as entertainment, but as moral lessons or evidence of unfinished business. Basically medieval Reddit threads, but with more parchment and fewer arguments about cheese. One fringe tidbit adds a final layer. Some locals believed that if you followed the ghost monk long enough, he'd lead you to a treasure hidden during the Scottish raids. The treasure, of course, was never found unless you count the stoneware jug archaeologists dug up containing nothing but dirt. To be fair, medieval people considered dirt valuable in at least 3 different religious contexts, which historians still argue about. You take one last step, feeling the cool air settle around you. The ruins lie still, yet the story continues to breathe, a quiet reminder that legends aren't always wrong. Sometimes they're just waiting for science to catch up. You move northward now, leaving the last crumbled arch of Byland behind as the night deepens and the world grows quieter. Quieter, except for the faint, impossible hum rising from the Orkney wind. At first you think it's just your ears adjusting, the way they sometimes buzz after you've been in silence too long. But then you realize the hum isn't inside your ears, it's in the stones beneath your boots. This is where the old islanders warn travelers to tread lightly. You step into a clearing dotted with standing stones, each one slanted at a peculiar angle as if frozen mid-conversation. According to medieval legend, these were the singing stones of Orkney, which villagers claimed would call to each other on certain nights. Supposedly, if you placed your hand against one, you'd feel it vibrate with a low, mournful song like a whale humming through granite. And because medieval people were both brave and suspicious, they decided the stones were either ancient magic or someone's cursed ancestor. No middle ground. You crouch beside the nearest stone, feeling for that vibration. At first, nothing. Just cold grit, tiny lichen patches, and the faint smell of sea spray drifting in from the coast. But then, almost shyly, a gentle tremor moves under your fingers. A soft note rises, no louder than the sigh of a sleeping cat. You glance around instinctively, half expecting some monk with a tuning fork to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But the clearing stays, utterly still. The legend says the stones were once giants turned to rock for breaking a sacred oath. The story sounds dramatic, but honestly, every medieval place claims giants misbehaved there at least once. It was practically a requirement. Haunted forest? Giants. Weird echo? Giants. Your crops failed because you overslept and forgot to water them? Definitely giants. Yet here's where things get weirdly scientific. Centuries after the legend took form, researchers discovered that many of Orkney's stones produce natural low-frequency resonance when strong ocean winds hit them at the right angle. Think of them as prehistoric singing bowls, only heavier and more judgmental. The hum you hear now is caused by micro-vibrations in the stone, shaped by their peculiar placement and the island's relentless gusts. A mainstream historical fact makes this even more grounded. Medieval Norse settlers in Orkney wrote about certain standing stones, speaking in storms, noting that their voices changed with the seasons. These record keepers weren't poets, they were documenting environmental cues. Some scholars even think the stones served as early weather indicators, which is either brilliant or the medieval version of checking your horoscope. Imagine consulting a rock to decide whether you should bring an umbrella. You take a step back and feel the ground shift lightly under your weight. There's a quirkier detail islanders pass down. If you whispered a question near one stone, another stone across the field would answer. Obviously the stones weren't debating medieval politics, but the phenomenon was real enough. Later studies found that pockets of the terrain act like acoustic channels, carrying sound in bizarre ways. A whisper here can travel in a straight line, bounce off a stone, and arrive at another spot with an amplified echo. Medieval people didn't have microphones, but they knew creepy acoustics when they heard them. Still, historians argue, whether these stones were deliberately arranged to exploit the natural sound paths, or whether their alignment was accidental. The fact that many formations correspond to winter solstice lines makes the debate even spicier. You can practically hear 2 academics in a conference hall insisting, "They did it intentionally," while another counters, "They just liked putting rocks in symmetrical places." Meanwhile, the stones keep humming gently behind them, refusing to clarify anything. You wander deeper among the monoliths, brushing against stone surfaces smoothed by centuries of salt wind. In the faint moonlight, each one feels like a sentinel, The air itself seems tuned, shaped by unseen currents. And as you breathe in the cold Orkney night, the next twist of the legend unfurls. The stones were said to protect certain secrets. Travelers claimed that if you listened long enough, a stone would tell you where hidden things were, buried treasure, bones, or lost pathways. Most of those tales were pure folklore, but here comes the fringe tidbit. In the late 1800s, a farmer digging near the Ring of Brodgar uncovered a cache of carved antler pieces exactly where a local tale claimed ancient offerings had been hidden. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone in the Middle Ages actually heard something like the hollow echo from a buried chamber and didn't know how to explain it. You pause beside a taller stone, leaning your shoulder against it, feeling the faint thrum pass into your bones. The wind shifts, and suddenly the stone's chorus changes pitch slightly higher, almost melodic. It's a strange comfort, like the land is humming itself to sleep. You imagine medieval villagers sitting around listening to the stones on windy nights, trying to decide whether the sound meant weather changes, wandering spirits, or just another excuse to avoid chores. And as you take one slow step after another, the sound follows you soft, steady, and ancient. Not eerie anymore, just familiar. Like a voice that doesn't need language to be understood. The stones keep humming as you walk, guiding you onward through the night. You follow the coastline south, the hum of Orkney's stones fading behind you, like someone slowly turning down the volume on an ancient radio. Soon, the wind shifts warmer, carrying the dense urban scent of Paris, the soft tang of stone dust, river moisture, and the faint sweetness of bakeries still working late into the night. You walk toward the city's oldest quarter, where the medieval streets once curled tightly like tangled yarn. Down beneath your feet, beyond the cobbles and cafes, the ground hides something far darker than any croissant could sweeten. Tonight, you descend carefully into the story of Paris's lost plague pits, those whispered trenches of mass death that medieval Parisians claimed were overflowing with bodies. People said the pits were so full that the earth itself rose and fell like breathing flesh, which is not exactly the property description you'd want when renting an apartment. As you walk along a narrow alley, the hum of the city softens. A metal grate covers a dark drop into the old limestone quarries. You peer down, feeling cold, stale air brush your face. The legend begins that beneath Paris lay enormous death trenches, pits hastily dug during waves of plague and famine, and that the dead were packed in so tightly their bones fused together. Medieval clerics wrote that the trenches groan at night, which honestly might have been the sound of settling soil, but medieval folks were quick to blame ghosts for anything louder than a mouse sneeze. You step into a dim staircase leading into the underground. The air cools with every step, wrapping around you like a damp cloak. Dust motes drift lazily in your phone's flashlight beam, and your footsteps echo with that hollow, cathedral-like resonance unique to tunnels that were never meant for the living. One mainstream historical fact anchors everything. Paris truly did create massive plague pits, especially during the 14th century Black Death and again in the 17th century. Entire cemeteries such as Les Innocents overflowed so badly that bodies surfaced into neighbors' basements. There are recorded complaints from residents who literally found femurs poking through their cellar walls. Imagine trying to store your wine beside that. You turn a corner and enter a chamber carved long before Paris thought of sewers, electricity, or tourist signs. The stone ceiling hovers low, and the corridor stretches ahead like a throat swallowing you whole. This is where medieval people whispered that the pits connected to each other through secret tunnels, forming a labyrinth meant to keep the dead from walking upward. Obviously, zombies weren't a real concern, but that phrase tells you exactly how terrified people were. Death was everywhere, and the boundaries between worlds felt thin. But here comes the kicker. Scholars long dismissed the idea that bodies were piled in huge connected trenches, a sort of super pit, because it sounded too exaggerated. Then, in the late 20th century, during construction near Les Halles, workers broke into a series of underground chambers filled with thousands of skeletons arranged in layers, arms entwined like woven cloth. The pits were real, larger than expected, deeper than feared, and definitely not where you want to lose your phone. You shine your light across the walls, and the stone seems to ripple slightly, just the trick of shadows, but you instinctively step back anyway. A quirky medieval belief comes to mind. People insisted that if you sneezed while standing over a plague pit, one of the souls beneath would claim your breath. It's basically medieval superstition mixed with the world's worst allergy management plan. As you walk onward, the tunnel widens into a cavern supported by rough pillars. Architecture feels both functional and eerie, like a subway station designed by someone who hated joy. In the darkness, you can almost imagine medieval Parisians lowering cartloads of bodies here. The sound of wooden wheels clattering over uneven stone, the heavy silence afterward. And because medieval record-keeping was sometimes more enthusiastic than accurate, several accounts describe lights appearing between the stacked dead, probably phosphorescent bacteria, though historians still argue whether some sightings were natural or embellished to warn children away from dangerous areas. A cold drip of water hits your wrist. You glance up and see a thin line of moisture threading from the ceiling. That same moisture once caused the most infamous part of the legend. Villagers swore that the pits swell and shrink with the rain, making the ground above rise slightly during storms. Modern geologists found the truth. Decomposing bodies release gases and create pockets that expand or collapse with water pressure. Medieval people didn't know that, so of course they thought the pits were alive. You take a long, slow breath as you enter a smaller chamber where the ceiling dips so low you instinctively duck. The walls here feel closer, the echo sharper. On one wall, carved initials from centuries ago, maybe quarry workers, maybe curious intruders, maybe someone trying to leave a quiet, "I was here" before the tunnels swallowed the memory. A fringe historical tidbit adds flavor. There were medieval rumors of secret cults using the plague pits for rituals, nothing explicit or violent, just ceremonies meant to honor the restless. Archaeologists haven't found direct proof, but a few odd objects have surfaced down here. Carved bone figurines, small cups, bits of pottery placed with care. Whether it was ritual or just bored workers decorating the place, historians still argue over it. You press onward, feeling the floor flatten and the walls widen. The air grows less suffocating, and the darkness shifts from oppressive to merely atmospheric. The way a candlelit room feels big when you first enter, but cozy once your eyes adapt. You imagine medieval stories being whispered above ground, parents scaring their children away from the deep pits, lovers daring each other to peek through cemetery grates, soldiers sharing rumors of entire streets sinking into the dead. Even now, Paris occasionally uncovers forgotten plague trenches during construction. Bones surface where no cemetery was mapped. Foundations shift. History pokes through the pavement like a curious ghost. You reach the end of the tunnel. A faint breeze from a modern ventilation shaft brushes your cheek, bringing with it a hint of city life, car fumes, bakery warmth, the normalcy of the present waiting above. Up there, everything feels ordinary. Down here, you've walked through a legend that was never just a legend. You climb the last metal ladder out of Paris's underbelly, brushing stone dust from your hands as the night air greets you again, cooler now, sharper, as if the city wants to help you forget the weight of the plague pits below. But before the relief can settle, you feel something else tugging at the edges of the dark. A whisper of armor, a soft metallic rattle, almost like someone adjusting a breastplate just out of view. You follow that sound east, slipping into the dim medieval streets of Lübeck, where the buildings still seem to lean in like gossiping neighbors. Up ahead, a faint glow spills from an old gatehouse, and for a moment you see it, the silhouette of a tall knight standing perfectly still, as if carved from the night itself. His posture is rigid, ageless, too rigid, too ageless, and the air feels suddenly tighter around your ribs. The people of Lübeck told stories of the immortal knight, a wandering figure in armor who appeared unchanged across generations. Grandfathers claimed they'd seen him when they were children. Their grandchildren insisted they'd seen the same man, same armor, same silent stare. And because medieval people had zero chill, they firmly decided he was either undead or on an extremely long lunch break from Valhalla. You step closer to where the figure once stood, but of course he's gone, leaving only the faint impression of cold metal lingering in the atmosphere, as if the knight remembers him, even when he isn't there. Here's the thing. The legend wasn't pulled from thin air. A mainstream historical discovery from the Lübeck City Archives records an incredibly odd case. Over several centuries, tax documents, militia rolls, and port logs repeatedly mention a knight with the same name, same description, and same distinctive crest. A silver boar's head over a red field. Almost no aging. No family records. No death record at all. It was as if he simply persisted. You imagine medieval bureaucrats, scratching their heads, quills hovering over parchment, Do we charge him again? Is this the same guy? Is he collecting pensions in triplicate? If they had Excel, they probably would have crash-looped the entire city. You wander down a cobbled street lined with timbered houses, each one warped slightly by centuries of settling. The moonlight slants between the rooftops, breaking into sharp patterns like shattered stained glass. As you walk, the legend unfolds. The knight supposedly appeared in times of crisis, fires, invasions, storms, always silent, always watching. He would stand at the gate or atop a wall for hours, then vanish without trace. Medieval mothers used him as a bedtime story threat. Behave, or the silent night will peek through your window, which honestly sounds like the worst possible holiday mascot. But here's where fringe intersects with fact. In the 1,990 seconds, researchers analyzing Lübeck burial vaults found a skeleton with an extremely rare genetic anomaly, affecting growth and aging, similar to conditions today, associated with slowed bone development and unusually youthful features across decades. The skeleton was found near equipment resembling a knight's gear, though mismatched, hinting at disguises or recycled parts. Some scholars believe this person, or someone with a similar condition, might have aged so slowly that villagers assumed he wasn't aging at all. And yes, historians still argue whether the documents refer to one man or several wearing the same armor, like a medieval superhero franchise. If Marvel existed back then, they'd have milked Immortal Knight IV. The boar returns, for all it was worth. You reach Lübeck's Holstentor Gate, its brick towers rising like enormous, sleepy guards. Wind slips through the archway with a soft hiss. That's when you notice deep grooves carved into the stone, horizontal lines perhaps 3 inches wide. Armor marks, sword height. The kind left by someone who leaned here often. You brush your fingers across them and feel the stone warm from centuries of human touch. This is where the knight was said to stand most nights, never speaking, his silver boar crest catching what little moonlight dared to reflect off him. Merchants arriving late swore they saw him blink, turn his head, or gesture toward distant ships, though those same merchants also drank a suspicious amount of spiced wine. You step inside the gatehouse, and the atmosphere thickens again, as if the brick walls have soaked up every rumor ever whispered here. A quirky detail floats to mind. Some medieval Lübeckers believed the knight was cursed to wander until he confessed a great crime, but because he refused to speak, they assumed he was stuck forever. Others insisted he was a guardian spirit, a holdover from the city's pagan roots, wearing knightly armor simply because medieval fashion was confusing. Inside the small chamber, the air grows cooler. A single torch bracket long, empty hangs crooked on the wall. The floor stones dip slightly in the center, worn into a shallow bowl by boots, sabatons, and centuries of shifting weight. You stand there now, where he would have stood, and the silence feels deeper than before. The city outside still hums faintly, but here the world seems paused. The story takes one last twist. In 1756, a chronicle mentions a "walks the night man," matching the knight's description almost 300 years after the earliest sightings. The writer dismissed him as a ghost, but described details too specific to be invented. Same stance, same armor shape, same crest over the heart. Was it a hoax? A committed cosplayer centuries before Comic-Con? Or was the legend closer to truth than expected? Historians predictably still argue about it. You take a final breath and step back into the street. Lübeck's night feels calmer now, as if the immortal knight has stepped aside to let you pass. Somewhere in the distance, a ship bell rings a soft metallic tone that blends perfectly with the lingering echo of armor. And as you continue forward, you can't shake the sense that someone tall, silent, and unchanging is still watching from the shadows behind you. You leave Lübeck behind, the faint echo of armor fading like a half-remembered dream. The road ahead leads you into a gentler darkness, pine-lined paths, rolling fog, and the soft hush of a forest that feels like it's holding its breath. The trees here stand tall and crooked in that way old trees do, as if they've lived long enough to think about developing personalities. And as you walk deeper under their tangled canopy, you begin to hear it. Not wind, not animals. Not your imagination, though, let's be honest. Your imagination is absolutely doing push-ups right now. It's whispering. Long, thin threads of sound that seem to travel from tree to tree, almost like the forest is trying to gossip about you. This is the land of the whispering forest of Poland, a place where medieval villagers swore that trees spoke not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally spoke, They insisted the woods carried voices that moved in waves, urging travelers to turn back or walk faster. Personally, if a pine tree politely told me to speed up, I would absolutely sprint. You step onto a narrow footpath, soft soil muffling your footsteps. The night air here feels charged, alive in a way you can almost taste. Pine resin sweetness mixes with cool earth and something faintly metallic, an aroma locals claimed meant the forest spirits are awake. Medieval people didn't keep many scientific journals, but they were very committed to believing leaves had personal opinions. The legend goes, people heard murmurs that followed them. Not constant chatter, more like subtle shifts of sound that created an eerie sense of being watched. Farmers approaching from the east side swore the trees warned them of storms. Hunters in the west claimed the pines, rustled in response to whispered questions. Some even believed that the forest chose who entered safely and who ended up lost for hours, which honestly sounds like the trees taking their job way too seriously. But here's where reality steps in, wearing sensible shoes. A mainstream scientific fact explains part of it. Poland is home to several unusual acoustic forests, where tree placement, uneven terrain, and wind channels create natural whispering effects. It's like the landscape is one giant soundboard, bouncing noises around in spooky, unpredictable ways. Researchers studying these areas discovered that certain pine groves amplify soft noises like your coat brushing a branch until they sound like murmurs. The phenomenon is similar to whispering galleries, except instead of domes or cathedrals, you've got forests doing ASMR before it was trendy. You pause, tilting your head. The whispers shift again, now threading through branches above you like someone dragging silk across bark. The sound is strangely directional, one moment behind you, the next to your left, even though the wind is steady. You take a slow breath, reminding yourself that sound does weird things between trees. Meanwhile, your brain is like, that's cute, but we're still scared. There's a quirky old belief tied to this place. Villagers claimed the forest could mimic human voices. If someone asked a question loudly, the trees might answer with garbled echoes. Medieval travelers used this like a natural Siri, except their Siri occasionally told them to avoid wolves or to repent, depending on the mood of the wind. A chronicler from the 15th century wrote about a female voice calling his name 3 times from inside a grove. Historians still argue whether he encountered a strange echo, a trickster, or just had one too many sips of homemade mead. You continue walking until the path opens into a sunken clearing, like a shallow bowl where the earth dips, softly. At the center lies a small circle of stones, half buried and tilted. Pagan ritual site? Medieval hangout spot? Accidental artistic statement? Archaeologists say it could be an ancient ceremonial ring dating back to Slavic tribal worship, though nobody agrees on which tribe or what ritual. You run your fingertips over one stone, its surface pitted by centuries of weather. Moss creeps along the edges like a green shadow. The whispers change again lower, swirling in a circular pattern that seems to follow the shape of the clearing. This is where the legend hits its spookiest form. Locals believe the forest here acted as a spirit amplifier, a place where the dead communicated through rustling leaves. Stories tell of widows hearing their lost husbands' voices when the wind passed through certain branches. Heartbreaking, eerie, and very on-brand for medieval storytelling. But modern research gives a grounded explanation. The clearing creates a natural acoustic vortex, a rare shape where sound bends back toward the center. Whisper on one side, and the noise returns from another, a bit like a natural megaphone. Ancient people didn't have the vocabulary for acoustic vortex, so they went straight to spirits. Honestly, fair enough. If a clearing repeated my voice back at me in a new direction, I'd assume ghosts too. You hear a soft flutter, a nocturnal bird shifting somewhere overhead, but the whispering continues underneath it, blending with the night air in a hypnotic rhythm. There's something soothing about it now, like the forest has relaxed, lowering its voice to a softer tone. The branches sway gently, creating layers of sound that rise and fall in waves. You stroll between the trees, brushing aside low-hanging needles, each step sinking you deeper into the sensory tapestry. You remember one fringe tidbit. Medieval travelers believed that if you slept here, the forest would teach you a secret through dreams. Some claimed to wake with visions, others with premonitions, others with absolutely nothing except mosquito bites and regret. But a handful swore that the whispering voices helped them navigate future hardships. Were they dreaming, hallucinating from cold, or genuinely experiencing something profound? Historians still argue whether the stories are symbolic spiritual, or just medieval marketing to draw attention to a very creepy forest. You look up. The trees lean inward, framing the night sky in a ragged circle. Stars peek through the canopy, like tiny, watchful eyes. The whispering continues, not menacing, not urgent, just steady, almost like encouragement. You keep walking, and the forest follows with its soft, endless murmurs. The path ahead glows faintly in moonlight, guiding you onward through the talking trees. You slip out of the whispering pines, letting their murmurs fade behind you like a secret you weren't supposed to overhear. The air grows warmer, drier, humming faintly with cicadas as you cross into the rugged hills of northern Portugal. The terrain here feels ancient, cracked stone underfoot, scrubby grass rustling along the slopes, and scattered ruins clinging to the earth like tired guardians. Somewhere ahead lies a village that medieval travelers genuinely avoided after sunset. Because this is the land of the cursed well of Castelo Rodrigo, a place so infamous that even 14th century guidebooks basically said, "Don't go near it unless you want problems." And medieval guidebooks weren't exactly known for their dramatic flair. They were more like, "Here are 3 roads, one is mud, good luck." So if they bothered to warn people, something weird was definitely happening. You feel the ground begin to dip as you approach the old fortress walls. A thin fog clings low to the earth, crawling across your boots as if trying to pull you back. The ruined battlements of Castelo Rodrigo loom above a jagged crown of stone silhouetted against the moonlit sky. And in the middle of the ruined square, just where travelers described it centuries ago, sits a circular well built of pale granite blocks. A thick stone lip surrounds the opening, darkened with age, and something else, something like mineral stains, or scorch marks, or both. You walk closer, each step crunching over loose gravel. The well is deeper than it should be, far deeper than local geology makes sense for. People said if you dropped a pebble, it took so long to hit bottom that you began questioning your entire life choices. Some claimed they never heard it hit at all, which is either spooky or just a sign the well was way more complicated than anyone realized. The medieval legend was simple and terrifying. Livestock vanished after drinking from this well. Goats, sheep, even oxen just gone. Caravans passing by refused to water their animals here. A shepherd once insisted he watched his goats sink into the earth beside the well's edge, leaving nothing but hoofprints and a single panicked bleat. Villagers called the place O Poço que, come the well that eats. Classic medieval understatement. But then the story gets stranger. Some nights, people said the well made noises, deep rumbling groans, like something alive shifting far below. Others heard splashes from water levels that shouldn't have existed, and on a few particularly windy nights, they swore the well exhaled warm air, carrying the smell of sulfur. That alone was enough to send anyone running. Medieval people were ready to invent all kinds of supernatural explanations, but the well is breathing fire breath was a hard no. You kneel beside the well now, peering into the darkness. The opening seems to swallow the moonlight. You drop a small stone in because honestly, how can you resist? And wait. 1 second. 2. 5. 10. The stone finally clinks faintly far below, bouncing off something that does not sound like water. More like stone hitting stone. But here's the twist. Researchers eventually discovered a vast underground caste system beneath Castelo Rodrigo, an intricate network of sinkholes, fissures, and hidden chambers carved by water over thousands of years. This wasn't a normal well. It was basically a doorway into a natural maze. Large enough that livestock falling into invisible openings wasn't myth, it was geology being rude. One mainstream historical fact: medieval construction over karst terrain often caused sudden collapses. Entire barns, stables, even parts of roads would vanish overnight into soft limestone pockets. There are records from this region describing holes that open and close like mouths. Not literal mouths, obviously just sinkholes that collapsed and later refilled with debris. But it explains why animals disappeared near this cursed well. They weren't devoured by spirits, they simply fell into unstable ground. Still, that doesn't solve everything. You lean back as a warm breeze rises from the, well, subtle, but definitely real. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Sometime in the 17th century, a local priest recorded that on the feast of St. Bartholomew, the well roared like thunder from its belly. Modern research suggests this was caused by air pressure changes inside the sinkhole network, hot pockets of trapped air bursting upward when outer temperatures dropped suddenly. Basically, the world's worst natural trumpet. And of course, historians still argue whether some of the more dramatic accounts, like flames shooting out of the well, were exaggerated or simply misinterpreted methane pockets igniting when exposed to lanterns. Because yes, methane can do that. Imagine holding a torch over a hole and suddenly the earth burps fire at you. Anyone would call that a curse. You circle the well slowly, your hand brushing the stone lip. The granite is warm, warmer than the night air. The warmth pulses faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Logical explanation? The underground. Chambers below trap daytime heat and release it slowly. Spooky explanation? The well has opinions, and one of them is, you should leave. As you step onto the far side, something crunches under your boot. You crouch and pick up a chunk of stone flaked in odd patterns. Sharp, jagged-shaped, not by tools but by collapse. This is the same kind of fragment archaeologists found piled inside the chambers below. Some pieces even had medieval rope fibers stuck to them, suggesting people tried lowering buckets or unfortunate animals far deeper than the well was meant for. That detail fuels one more fringe theory. Some scholars believe villagers may have once used the well as a disposal site during outbreaks of disease, tossing contaminated objects or carcasses into the abyss. No bones have been recovered to confirm this, but the idea lingers in academic circles, an unsettling possibility that historians still argue over in conferences while trying not to spill their coffee. You stand, again, looking into the black throat of the well. The warm breeze sighs upward once more. The fog curls around your legs, and for a moment, the world feels suspended like the ground beneath you is deciding whether to stay solid or shift. But it doesn't. Not tonight. Instead, the air stills, and the path onward reveals itself between two broken walls. You walk away from the cursed well of Castello Rodrigo, hearing one last whisper of settling stone behind you, a soft reminder that legends sometimes grow from the earth itself. You move on from the crumbling Portuguese walls, following a ribbon of mist that stretches eastward like an invitation. The ground levels out into smooth cobbles, the scent of damp stone giving way to a sharper, metallic chill. Ahead, nestled into a twist of narrow lanes, rises the shadowed outline of Prague. Lanterns flicker from windows, casting long sheets of gold down alleyways that feel older than stories themselves. This is a city that keeps secrets the way trees keep rings, quietly, tightly, and with a flair for the dramatic. Somewhere in this maze of rooftops and spires, the medieval world whispered about a marvel no one could quite explain. The clockwork prophet of Prague. You step into a tiny square that feels half forgotten, hemmed in by steep gables and dark windows. The air hums faintly, as if an invisible gear turns somewhere out of sight. The legend begins here, where people claimed a mysterious mechanical figure once appeared at nightfall, giving cryptic predictions while gears inside its chest ticked softly like an impatient heart. Sounds unbelievable. Until you remember, medieval Prague was basically the Silicon Valley of alchemy. They had astronomers, mathematicians, clockmakers, and at least 3 guys claiming they could resurrect chickens with the right lunar timing. You approach an old stone workshop door. Above it hangs a rusting iron sign, shaped like a gear, its teeth long worn down. This was supposedly the workshop of a reclusive artisan, known only by his initials M.K. He specialized in intricate astronomical clocks and strange mechanical devices. People said he built an automaton that could walk, speak in riddles, and predict disasters. You push the door gently. It opens with a groan that sounds like a very tired ghost. Inside, dust lies thick over abandoned tools. The air smells metallic, like old springs and forgotten ambitions. You run a finger along a rusted vise. The silence hums in your ears. Then a soft tick. You freeze. Another tick. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. A loose gear, perhaps? A settling beam? Or the world messing with your sleep-deprived brain? Medieval villagers described hearing that same ticking every night near this workshop. They'd claim a metal figure would appear beneath the astronomical clock on the old town square, its mechanical jaw clicking open to announce what tomorrow held. Storms, fires, eclipses, or the arrival of foreign merchants. The kicker? The predictions were often correct or close enough that people didn't question the details. But here's where the legend sidles up to reality. Bohemian manuscripts from the 1400s describe rudimentary automata mechanical devices powered by weighted gears and water pressure. These weren't toys. They were complex machines for churches, processions, and even secret experiments. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval engineers in Central Europe built figures that could ring bells, nod heads, beat drums, and even shuffle small distances. Not exactly Terminator level, but impressive given their tech was basically metal, gravity, and hope. You walk back outside, following the cobbles toward the astronomical clock. Its ornate face glows faintly, illuminated by lantern light. You stand beneath it and feel the weight of centuries pressing inward. The legends said the clockwork prophet stood right here, tapping its metal foot in anticipation before speaking. One quirky tidbit from the era. Prague residents believed the automaton's predictions worked only on nights when the moon reflected in a specific window of the tower. On other nights, they said the prophet stayed silent because the gears of heaven were misaligned, which either means cosmic mysticism or the medieval equivalent of "nah, not tonight." Of course, historians still argue whether the clockwork prophet actually existed. Some think it was an exaggerated puppet used in processions. Others believe the predictions came from clever artisans using astronomical knowledge, disguised as a mechanical oracle to impress the public. A third group insists the whole thing was a collective hallucination, brought on by poor lighting, too much absinthe, or boredom. You step into the shadow of the clock tower and hear that ticking sound again, fainter, almost shy. You turn, expecting some modern gadget making noise, but the street is empty. Your footsteps echo softly as you walk under the old arches. At your right, a small alcove holds a niche carved with swirling decorative patterns. Some locals said this niche was where MK hid the automaton when it wasn't performing. Children dared each other to reach inside. Adults avoided it entirely. You crouch and peer into the niche. Your breath catches. There, beneath centuries of dust, lies a small metal plate etched with delicate gears and faint symbols. Your fingers brush over it lightly. It's cold. Too cold, as if the stone behind it still remembers a forgotten mechanism humming against it. You straighten up and continue down the silent alley. In the distance, the city's old astronomical tower gleams with a soft glow. The legend says the automaton stopped appearing after MK vanished. Some say he burned his notes and destroyed the prophet. Others say he built a chamber deep beneath the city filled with gears, weights, and water wheels and hid the automaton there to sleep until Prague needs it. Considering how chaotic medieval Prague was, it's surprising the city didn't just yell, "We need it." On day 2, you reach Charles Bridge. Statues loom above the parapet, casting long shadows over the Vltava River. A cool breeze drifts past you, carrying the crisp scent of flowing water. The clockwork prophet was rumored to walk this bridge on its final night, tapping its metal fingers against the stone as if testing the world one last time. The ticking sound returns just once, then disappears into the hum of the river. You rest your hand on the cold stone rail and watch the water slide silently under the arches. Somewhere beneath the current, gears may still lie rusting pieces of a medieval marvel, waiting for a new story to bring them back to life. And as you step off the bridge, the city behind you exhales, gentle and ancient, letting the mechanical whispers fade into the night. The river carries you onward, its cool breath following your steps as you drift away from Prague's clockwork mysteries. The night thickens, the air dampens, and you feel the ground shift beneath your feet. Not literally this time, thankfully, but atmospherically, like reality is sliding you into a different chapter without asking permission. You cross a narrow stone bridge and follow a worn footpath that snakes downward into a dim, older quarter of London, one that never shows up on postcards because the postcards are scared. A thin mist curls between the crooked houses, gathering in tight pockets around cellar doors. Somewhere far below you, water moves where it shouldn't, quietly, stubbornly, like it's trying not to attract attention. And this is where the medieval legends whisper again, a little more urgently now. Because you're about to walk straight into the myth of London's underground river spirits. You arrive at a narrow lane sloping toward a cluster of brick buildings. The architecture feels layered, like 3 centuries worth of builders all shrugged and said, close enough, stacking additions wherever space allowed. Beneath this part of the city, hidden from maps and tourists, flows the lost river fleet once wide enough for boats, now trapped in tunnels, culverts, and forgotten channels. Medieval Londoners insisted the river didn't just flow, it haunted. They said pale women drifted through basements along its banks, dripping water and speaking in voices like rushing currents. Others claimed strange vapors rose at night, making people hallucinate, faint, swear they saw wet footprints across dirt floors. And if you're imagining a damp Victorian ghost in a nightgown, sorry, wrong century. These legends go back to the 1100s, when Londoners didn't even have nightgowns, just tunics, cloaks, and a chronic desire to exaggerate. You approach a heavy wooden hatch set into a slanted courtyard. A rusty ring latch hangs from its center. You lift it just enough to peer down, and a wave of cool vapor slides over your face, carrying a scent somewhere between river water and old metal. The darkness below shifts with subtle movement. If you didn't know better, you'd swear someone just brushed past the water's surface. A faint splash echoes. Okay, creepy, but time to ground things with a mainstream historical fact. Many of London's underground rivers produce toxic gases, especially methane and hydrogen sulfide. Medieval basements built above these channels often filled with choking vapors. People entering with torches reported seeing shapes swirl in the haze, white twisting forms that looked disturbingly human. No wonder they believed the water spirits were angry. You descend a short set of stone steps. At the bottom lies a narrow tunnel, half drainage, half dungeon aesthetic. Water trickles somewhere just out of sight. You shift your weight, and your foot slips slightly on damp brick. The air is thick, heavy, carrying that same metallic tang you noticed earlier. You take a slow breath. Then you hear it. A soft, rhythmic drip, a faint sigh, and something almost like a whisper. Great. Totally normal. Totally fine. Medieval Londoners insisted these underground corridors were alive, sentient waterways that mourned, scolded, or pleaded for attention. One chronicler described hearing a woman's voice echo through the fleet's channels at night. He said she wept whenever storms came and laughed when the riverbanks overflowed. Historians still argue whether he genuinely heard something or was experiencing early-stage sewer hallucinations, which, let's be honest, is an occupational hazard. You continue deeper, brushing past a column of old masonry. A narrow groove in the ground channels water from somewhere ahead. It curves to the right, disappearing into darkness. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval homeowners were so convinced spirits lived here that they left offerings, herbs, coins, bread, even garlic, because why not? Archaeologists later discovered these in odd clusters along the fleet's old course. No one knows if the offerings were spiritual acts or just people trying to deodorize their basements. You duck your head as the tunnel lowers. A cold drip falls onto your neck, shockingly precise, like the ceiling is trying to get your attention. You turn your headlamp down the passageway. Something glimmers. A thin ribbon of moving water slipping between bricks, its surface trembling with every microcurrent. Then you see them. Not ghosts, not spirits, just shapes on the water, distorted reflections, ripples forming vague outlines that look eerily human for a fraction of a second before dissolving. Your heart jumps anyway. The legend said these were the river women spirits of drowned maidens, guardians of London's hidden waterways. They were believed to warn residents of sickness, floods, or impending death. If you saw one, it meant something was coming. And if you heard one, well, people said you should pray. But science again slides in with a lantern and notebook. Modern hydrologists note that underground rivers often create standing wave illusions, where ripples intersect at just the right angles to form vertical shapes on the water's surface. Couple that with poor lighting and imagination, and boom, you've invented a ghost. You follow the channel a little farther until the passage widens around a large brick column. Here, the river runs openly, weaving through the space like a shallow silver serpent. You kneel beside it, fingers hovering just above the surface. The current is mild, but a faint vibration travels through it, a steady, quiet hum. You feel it travel into your fingertips. This hum terrified medieval residents. They believed the river was talking in an underground language, warning them or cursing them. But today we know the hum comes from flows of trapped air, vibrating through narrow channels, acting like a natural pipe organ with questionable tuning. You stand again, brushing moisture off your hands, and turn to leave. As you do, the river sighs, a long exhale of trapped air escaping through a vent. It sounds uncannily like a person releasing a tired breath. You glance back instinctively. The tunnel is empty, silent. No pale figures, no voices, just water and stone, doing what they've always done, move, echo, and play tricks on people who walk too far into the dark. You climb back toward the city air, the mist rolling upward around you like a curtain closing. When you reach the surface, London feels calmer, drier, lighter, like it's relieved you made it back. Below, the hidden river continues whispering, shaping legends out of every ripple. The London mist loosens its grip as you step onto firmer, drier ground again. Your boots find a new rhythm on an old Roman road that threads south toward the heart of medieval France. The night grows warmer, thicker, carrying the earthy scent of farmland mixed with distant wood smoke. Owls call from treetops. A fox darts across the path, glancing back at you like it knows you're headed somewhere questionable and is politely declining the invitation. Ahead, low hills rise like the backs of sleeping animals. The moon hangs over them in a pale arc, illuminating a region that once terrified every farmer, shepherd, and night traveller who fell within its shadow. This is Auvergne, the land of the were-boar. You follow a winding track that hugs the side of a dense, ancient forest. The trees crowd close, their trunks thick and knotted, their branches curling downward like claws. Medieval people didn't dare pass here alone after dusk. They whispered about a monstrous boar bigger than any natural creature, with eyes like burning coals and a roar that shook the leaves off trees. Worse, they insisted the beast wasn't born but made, the result of a cursed man doomed to shapeshift into a raging animal under certain moons. And because medieval France loved drama almost as much as it loved bread, the stories grew wilder with each retelling. You step through a gap in the underbrush, entering a clearing silvered in moonlight. The grass lies flattened in long sweeping arcs. Tufts of earth sit freshly torn up. Something large has been rooting here recently. The were-boar legend started with sightings of a huge, oddly behaving boar harassing livestock. But things escalated quickly. Farmers claimed it stalked them. Shepherds said it charged without warning. Entire caravans reported seeing a creature, as tall as a horse, with tusks like carved ivory scythes. People described the same bizarre detail. The beast didn't move like a normal animal, it moved like something intelligent, shifting its weight with unsettling precision, watching them with calculating stillness. You crouch and touch one of the uprooted patches. The ground is soft, freshly disturbed. Something snarled here, ate here, or if the legend holds, transformed here. But time to anchor this. A mainstream historical fact explains some of the madness. Auvergne experienced several rabies outbreaks during the Middle Ages, affecting wolves, dogs, and yes, wild boars. Rabid animals can behave erratically, charging unprovoked, pacing in circles, foaming, snapping, or appearing fearless. A rabid boar would have been an absolute nightmare. Strong, fast, territorial, and increasingly aggressive. The perfect fuel for a shapeshifter myth. You walk deeper into the clearing and spot long gouges scraped into a tree trunk deep, parallel cuts several inches above your waist. You run your fingers over them, and the bark shreds flake away like brittle paper. These are no woodcutter marks. They're too jagged, too irregular. A breeze sweeps through the clearing, carrying the thick, musky scent of forest floor mixed with something harsher, like the metallic tang of disturbed soil. You inhale cautiously. The smell sits heavy on your tongue. Medieval villagers claimed the were-boar was once a hunter who killed a sacred animal and was cursed to take its shape each time he felt anger. Some versions insist he still remembered being human and would weep after each rampage. Others say he lost himself completely, becoming more beast than man. Either way, the tale became so rooted in the region that even tax records mention livestock lost to the devil's boar. Of course, historians still argue whether there was an actual single creature behind the legend or whether multiple boars simply attacked over decades. A fringe historian once joked the were-boar was France's first serial killer pig, which is both absurd and unhelpful, but medieval villagers might have agreed. You notice something else now. Tracks. Deep, wide, pressed into the soft earth, longer than a typical boar print. You follow them a few steps until the trail disappears into thick brush. The forest presses close, swallowing light. A quirky tidbit. Auvergne hunters kept unusually detailed boar records because the animals were considered both pests and trophies. Some 14th century logs describe boars of unnatural size, weighing twice the typical amount, with tusks that curled upward like demons' horns. One entry even claims a boar survived 7 spear wounds before finally dropping. Whether that's true or just medieval bravado, the exaggeration fed the legend beautifully. You shift your weight as the undergrowth rustles to your right. A twig snaps, the leaves shiver, you freeze. But instead of a monstrous, Creature launching out. A small shape scurries away a badger. Offended you, ruined its dramatic build-up. You exhale slowly, rolling your eyes at yourself. The forest grows quieter again. Too quiet. You press onward, circling the clearing to a narrow ravine where moonlight barely reaches. Here, the legend becomes more grounded in evidence. During a 19th century excavation near this ravine, researchers found an oversized boar skull, its dimensions unusually large, with tusk roots indicating impressive length. Some believed this skull inspired the medieval stories. Others thought the animal was simply a genetic outlier, a prehistoric leftover still roaming into the Middle Ages. And yes, scholars still argue whether the skull belonged to a naturally huge boar or if there were once more of these beasts lurking around. You run your hand along the ravine's stone edge. The rock feels cold, gritty, ancient. A faint breeze carries up from below, whispering through narrow cracks. The sound resembles a low growl if you let your imagination go too far. The kind of sound medieval villagers would absolutely blame on a cursed monster rather than wind physics. You turn away from the ravine, and the forest begins to breathe again. Soft rustles, quiet chirps, the rhythmic whisper of leaves shaking off their tension. You step back onto the main path, and as you do, the moonlight shifts. For one instant, the shape of a boar's silhouette crosses the tree line, just a shadow, broad and brief, easily explained by branches or a passing cloud. But you feel it anyway, the prickling sensation that something powerful once moved here. Something real enough to terrify an entire region, and perhaps, on some nights, something still does. You walk on, leaving Auvergne's haunted clearing behind, as the path guides you deeper into the night and toward the next legend, waiting patiently in the dark. You leave the forests of Auvergne behind, brushing stray pine needles from your sleeves as the night unfolds into a wider, gentler darkness. The air warms again, tinged with salt and distant echoes of rolling waves. You walk across a wooden bridge that creaks under your weight dramatically, of course, because bridges love to make you feel like you're in danger, even when you're decidedly not, and soon the scent shifts into something unmistakably Venetian. The lagoon breathes in soft rhythms, and the moon gleams off the canals like someone polished them just for this moment. Narrow alleys twist between stone facades, and up ahead, the faint glow of furnaces dances against the night sky. You've reached Murano, Glass Island, Magic Island, allegedly cursed island. It depends on who you ask and how dramatic they're feeling. But tonight, you're here for one shimmering, stubborn legend, the tale of Venetian glass that bleeds light. You step into a courtyard where faint warmth radiates from a glassmaker's workshop. Even at this hour, the place hums with residual heat, like a dragon just wandered off and left the oven on low. The air is alive with flecks of dust that catch moonlight like tiny sparks. You peer into the workshop through an open archway. The hushed glow of still warm furnaces pulses like tired lungs. This is where medieval travelers swore they saw chalices that glowed even after the fire died. Not just reflections, actual light radiating from within the glass itself. People claimed the vessels pulsed softly, shifting colors like candlelight filtered through feathers. Some described them as bleeding gold, breathing silver, or holding fire that refused to sleep. You step inside. Rows of glass pieces sit cooling on long wooden shelves, goblets, beads, bowls, some translucent, some clouded, some shimmering faintly. Your hand hovers over a thin-walled chalice. The surface looks like ordinary glass, until you tilt your head. A soft gleam pulses within, as if a tiny ember were trapped inside. A trick of the moonlight? Maybe. But the legend didn't survive centuries because of moonlight accidents. A mainstream historical fact grounds this story. Murano glassmakers in the Middle Ages experimented with rare minerals, some of which produced natural luminescence. They used manganese, copper salts, and even traces of uranium-bearing sand, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to create odd optical effects. Certain pieces really did glow faintly in low light, especially after being heated all day. You lift the chalice gently. The glass feels warm, like it remembers the fire. And then there it is. A faint internal shimmer moves through it like liquid gold, sliding along invisible veins. The effect is subtle, but unmistakable. You exhale softly. Okay, that's definitely more than moonlight. The medieval story grows stranger. People believed these glowing chalices had prophetic powers, that if you drank from one, under a new moon, it would reveal secrets in your dreams. Some nobles paid absurd sums to acquire them because, let's be real, If medieval influences existed, they'd absolutely hype magical dream cups on every platform. The glassmakers leaned into the legend because nothing sells faster than mystical, but make it luxury. You set the chalice down and move deeper into the workshop. Tools lie scattered across a bench, iron rods, wooden paddles, chisels worn smooth by decades of use. A pale powder coats the edges of a mixing bowl. You dip a finger in. It glitters faintly. A quirky tidbit. Some formulas for glowing glass used calcined fish scales. Yes, actual fish scales crushed into powder. These created a pearlescent shimmer that caught and held light in weird ways. Imagine telling a medieval noble, "Yes, this cup glows because sardines." Undignified? Absolutely. Effective? Even more so. You wander toward the furnace. Though mostly cooled, a soft orange ember still glows deep inside, casting the workshop in warm shadows. The air around it shimmers faintly. You notice a glass rod on a rack nearby, thin, slightly curved, infused with a strange translucence. When you angle it just right, tiny sparks ripple along its length like stars flickering awake. Historians still argue whether this effect was intentional or a happy accident. Some insist the glassmakers discovered a natural phosphorescent compound but didn't understand the chemistry. Others believe it was a visual illusion caused by layered materials. A minority argues boldly, dramatically, that these artisans unlocked formulas now lost to time. Knowing how secretive Murano craftsmen were, it wouldn't surprise anyone. You walk to a side shelf holding older pieces, dustier, rougher, more experimental. One in particular catches your eye. A thick tumbler with swirling red veins trapped inside the glass. It almost looks like molten metal frozen in motion. You tilt it slowly. The red lines brighten and fade with each shift of angle. It feels alive, like blood pulsing through transparent arteries. This is the bleeding glass, described in medieval journals. Some chroniclers claimed the veins moved on their own. That sounds embellished, but staring at it now, you understand why they felt that way. The material responds to light with an almost eerie sensitivity. You set it down carefully before your imagination decides to go full horror movie. Stepping outside the workshop, you walk toward the canal. The water reflects soft gold from scattered lanterns. A cool breeze slips past, carrying hints of salt and furnace ash. You pause at the edge of a narrow stone bridge. Beneath it lies the heart of Murano's greatest secret. Centuries of experiments, pigments, formulas, and failures washed into the water. Some even say the canal walls absorbed trace minerals, making the water shimmer slightly under certain moons. A fringe theory one scholars love to bicker about suggests some medieval glowing glass came from accidental contamination with luminescent marine organisms. Like, imagine scooping sand from a beach where bioluminescent algae washed up, then melting it into a cup. Totally accidental, totally magical. Historians still argue whether this ever actually happened, or if it's just academic wishful thinking. You lean against the railing, absorbing the quiet drama of the night. A single gondola glides past, its lantern throwing streaks of light across the waves, and for a moment the canal itself glows not brightly, just faintly, like the water is remembering every glowing piece that ever fell into it. You move on, leaving Murano behind with that soft shimmer lingering in your peripheral vision. Not all legends are invented. Some are crafted, melted, shaped, polished, until truth itself becomes luminous. You cross another bridge, this one older, quieter, its stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the Venetian shimmer fades behind you like a candle finally giving in to sleep. The air cools, the world widens, and soon you find yourself drifting north into a land where forests thicken, villages cluster around steep church spires, and the wind carries a faint metallic tremor. Germany. The night deepens as you approach a small medieval town perched on a hill, its half-timbered houses leaning inward like gossips, listening for scandal. A narrow cobblestone street winds toward a dark silhouette at its center, a church tower tall enough to poke the belly of the sky. But tonight, it's not the shape of the tower that matters, it's the sound coming from it. A single bell, soft at first, then louder, ringing once, twice slow, deliberate, and absolutely no one is inside to ring it. Welcome to the legend of the German bells that ring themselves. You step into the churchyard, your footsteps crunching over gravel softened by moss. The bell tower looms above you. its old wooden beams creaking in the night. Breeze. A thin slit window glows faintly with moonlight, and then, impossibly, the bell rings again. Low, resonant, almost thoughtful, as if the tower is having second thoughts about waking the neighbors. Medieval villagers swore these bells rang on their own before disasters, storms, fires, attacks, or even crop failures. They believed the bells were alive, holy guardians warning the faithful. Others insisted spirits rang them, especially on nights thick with fog or strange winds. One chronicler claimed a bell tolled by itself for a full hour, as though swinging from invisible hands. You tilt your head. There's no movement in the tower, no flicker of torchlight, no human silhouette, just that eerie, deliberate sound. A mainstream historical fact unravels part of the mystery. Many medieval German bell towers were built with unusual mechanics, including wind-activated clappers, counterweights that shifted with temperature expansion, and long iron rods that ran through unstable beams. If wind hit the tower at the perfect angle, or if humidity swelled the wooden supports, the entire mechanism could move just enough for the clapper to strike the bell, meaning some towers weren't haunted. They were just moody. You approach the tower's base. A wooden door hangs crooked on old hinges, the kind of door that looks like it would close on its own just to cause drama. You nudge it open and step inside. The air is cool, dusty, filled with the faint aroma of old incense and damp stone. A narrow staircase spirals upward. You climb. With each step, the tower groans softly, as if complaining about your weight, rude but relatable. Halfway up, you pause. A sudden vibration hums through the wooden steps, the faint tremor of a bell preparing to ring. Then, bong. The sound explodes down the tower shaft, shaking dust loose from the rafters. Your hand grips the railing instinctively. The vibration ripples through your ribs. You keep climbing. At the top, you emerge into the bell chamber. The giant bronze bell hangs perfectly still. No swinging rope, no swaying, no phantom monk doing after-hours overtime. Yet you swear the air around it moves wrong, as if something invisible just pushed past you. A cool current brushes your cheek. You exhale slowly. Not spooky at all. Totally fine. Nature is just showing off. A quirky tidbit. Some German towns believed bells could chase away devils simply by ringing. In fact, communities rang them at regular intervals during sickness outbreaks, believing the sound purified the air. A few regions even named bells after saints and treated them like living protectors. There are surviving stories where people insisted that the bells rang themselves when danger approached, like a supernatural early warning system. But scientists and skeptical monks later discovered seismic activity often triggered these spontaneous bell rings. Even tiny tremors many humans couldn't detect could make a heavy bell sway just enough to hit its clapper. Earthquakes, mining, collapsing caverns, nearby construction each could set off an accidental holy alarm. And yes, historians still argue whether documented miracle rings were seismic coincidences, mechanical quirks, or embellished tales to boost a town's spiritual reputation. You step closer to the bell. Its bronze surface glimmers with patches of greenish patina, each mark a fingerprint of time. The clapper hangs perfectly still, until a shift of wind slides through the window, and the bell gives a soft, ghostly tap, just a tap, but enough to tighten the back of your neck. You crouch beside the support beam. It's warped, swollen from centuries of humidity. A metal rod above it vibrates slightly with every gust, tiny, almost imperceptible movements that could absolutely knock the clapper just enough on a particularly dramatic night. So yes, the bells did sometimes ring themselves, just not because a spirit needed attention, probably. Before you descend, you notice something etched into the wall graffiti from centuries ago. A rough carving of a bell with the words, Es spricht, it speaks. You touch the engraving lightly, feeling grooves carved by a hand long gone. Outside, as you descend the stairs, the tower groans again, one last wooden sigh. When you reach the ground, the churchyard is still. The wind weakens. The bell goes quiet. But as you turn to leave, it rings one final time. Soft, lonely, almost like a farewell. Or, like the tower settling. Historians still argue about that part too. You walk onward, into the dark, carrying the fading echo with you like a memory that refuses to stay still. You leave the lonely German bell behind, its final echo stretching across the night like a thread pulling you westward. The path dips, twists, and then rises again, carrying you toward a massive silhouette perched above the shifting waters of Normandy. Even from a distance, Mont Saint-Michel, it looks like a dream someone built too close to the sky. Spires leaning into the moonlight, walls melting into shadow, the entire island breathing with the tide. As you approach, the air changes, cooler, wetter, laced with salt. The kind of air that clings to your clothes and makes you second-guess stepping too close to anything that might suddenly move. The causeway ahead glistens with a thin sheen of water. Low tide has pulled back just enough for passage, but the sand on either side looks soft, deceptive, ready to swallow boots whole if you misjudge a step. This is where medieval pilgrims saw the shadow pilgrim of Mont Saint-Michel. A lone figure who walked the tidal flats every night, never leaving footprints, never speaking, never slowing. He moved like someone on a mission, always toward the abbey, always against the wind, always alone. And tonight, as you start across the causeway, you feel that presence immediately. Not spooky, not sinister, just watching. You take a careful step. The sand squishes, leaving a perfect print. Another step, another print. But ahead of you, just for an instant, the causeway glimmers as if someone passed through seconds before without disturbing a single grain. The medieval accounts where dramatic villagers swore the shadow pilgrim walked straight across quicksand without sinking. Fishermen claimed they saw him drifting along the coastline, long cloak trailing behind him like a torn banner. Some said he prayed as he walked, his voice blending with the tide's whisper. Others insisted he was a penitent soul who died before completing his pilgrimage and was doomed to repeat it nightly. You pause. A cold draft brushes past your back. You turn, but nothing's there except moonlit sand. A mainstream historical fact grounds this eerie legend. The tidal flats around Mont Saint-Michel create optical illusions called sand shear shadows. When the moisture levels shift, thin layers of sand slide over each other in near silent waves. Anyone walking nearby can cast a stretched, moving shadow that appears to detach from their body entirely or even precede them. Add torches, fog, and medieval eyesight? Boom, instant ghost pilgrim. But that doesn't explain everything. You crouch and run your hand across the sand. It's surprisingly elastic, springy in places. Certain sections barely shift under pressure. The pilgrims likely walked on firmer patches, while softer zones swallowed footprints instantly. Combine this with low light, and it absolutely could look like someone gliding rather than stepping. Yet the medieval rumors escalated anyway. A quirky tidbit. Monks inside the abbey claimed the shadow pilgrim never knocked, never entered, and never asked for blessings. Instead, he stopped at the outer gate and vanished. Some swore he left faint wet marks that evaporated the moment anyone approached. Others said they found small seashells arranged in perfect circles after his visit, symbols of pilgrimage and eternity. Modern archaeologists have found these shell patterns too, though many likely came from ritual offerings, not supernatural visitors. You continue along the causeway, the abbey now looming directly overhead. The tide begins whispering back in, slow but steady. Every few steps, you hear a faint slurp, the sand adjusting beneath you. A thin fog curls over the flats, twisting into long, ghostly ribbons. The wind picks up, carrying the deep, resonant hum of the abbey's stones cooling from the day's heat. Then you see it, a figure black silhouette, long cloak, head bowed, moving along the sand far to your left. Your heart skips. You blink. The figure flickers, then dissolves. A heat haze, a fog shadow, a wandering cloud? Or the legend doing what legends do, stretching reality in just the right place to make you doubt your own senses? You reach the stone gate and rest your hand against the arch. The stone is cool, slightly damp, humming with the vibration of waves striking the rocks below. You look back down the causeway. The sand gleams silver under the moon. No footprints anywhere except your own trail. Sharp, distinct, undeniably real. This is the moment medieval pilgrims described. Standing at the edge of the abbey, looking back, wondering if the shadow pilgrim would follow, or was already standing beside them, unseen. Historians still argue whether the tale came from real sightings of lone wanderers, misinterpreted shadows, or psychological effects of walking through fog on unstable ground. Some propose isolated monks used the flats for meditation at night. Others think exhausted travelers hallucinated from cold and hunger. A few researchers even argue the sand's reflective properties create unique silhouettes, still not fully studied. The tide rises. The flats shimmer. and as you step deeper into the abbey's shadow, you feel just for a moment a presence behind you. Light, weightless, curious. When you turn, the causeway is empty, but the air shifts like someone just slipped past. The shadow pilgrim never leaves prints, and maybe he doesn't need to. You move on, letting the Atlantic wind guide you into the next stretch of the night. You leave Mont Saint-Michel behind, feeling the tide reclaim the path at your heels as you walk inland again. The night grows softer, now warmer, gentler, with a stillness that settles over the land like a heavy blanket. You follow a dirt lane curving through the countryside of Dordogne, where medieval hamlets lie tucked beneath limestone cliffs and sleepy rivers. The air smells of damp moss, ripe fruit, and old stone. Crickets pulse in the hedges. A dog barks once in the distance, then quiets as if remembering the hour. This is a peaceful place. It shouldn't have a legend at all, and yet, it has one of the strangest. The 7-year sleepers of Dordogne. The story begins as you step through the narrow streets of a tiny village. Wooden shutters creak softly. Lanterns glow behind lace curtains. Everything feels normal, almost too normal, until you pass a stone house with a sagging clay roof and notice the carved symbol above the doorway. A spiral sun, deeply etched into the fine lintel. Medieval villagers marked their doors this way if someone inside had slept too long. You pause, hand brushing over the stone. It's cold, though the air is mild, and as you stand there, a hush falls over the street, not silence. Exactly, but a kind of waiting quiet, the sort that presses lightly against your skin. The legend goes like this. Several villagers, over the span of 2 centuries, reportedly fell into deep sleeps that lasted not days, not weeks, but years. During these long slumbers, their bodies barely changed, breathing shallow, skin pale but warm, limbs preserving strength. One man supposedly slept through a war. A woman slept through the death of her own parents. A shepherd boy, according to one chronicle, lay unmoving for 7 summers, then woke speaking of dreams as long as rivers. And the oddest detail? They all slept in this region. Always near these cliffs. Always near these caves. You walk past the old house and toward the limestone ridge. Rising behind the village, ivy crawls over the rock face in thick green ropes. A narrow path leads upward. You follow it as the sounds of the village fade behind you. When you reach the base of a shallow cave, the air cools noticeably, a crisp, clean cold, like the inhale before snowfall. You step inside. The cave isn't large, just a stone hollow shaped like an open mouth. A flat area near the back still bears a faint indentation, like someone once laid there long enough to leave a memory in the rock. A whisper of wind slinks past your ear. Medieval villagers were terrified of this cave. They believed the air inside carried a curse, the sleeping breath. If you inhaled too deeply, they said, you would collapse into slumber until the cave released you, which sounds dramatic until you remember medieval people blamed everything from comets to cheese for supernatural events. But here's a grounding twist. A mainstream scientific fact ties the legend to something real. The region has natural pockets of carbon dioxide and low oxygen outputs from subterranean fissures. In certain conditions, especially on hot, still nights, the cave air can become dense with nearly undetectable gases. Anyone sleeping here might fall unconscious, breathing slowing, metabolism dropping, not for years, obviously, but long enough to give the impression of unnatural slumber. You run your hand along the cool wall, moisture beads against your fingers. Was that enough to explain multi-year sleep? Of course not. But medieval villagers didn't measure time precisely. If someone vanished during harvest and woke in spring, they might have believed a year had passed. Misunderstandings blossomed into legends, but not all details are so easily dismissed. You step deeper. Tiny clusters of white fungus cling to the walls, glowing faintly in the moonlight filtering through cracks. A quirky tidbit. Some fungi in the Dordogne caves produce mild sedative compounds. Shepherds once used scraped spores to calm livestock. If someone inhaled a high concentration, they could absolutely sleep for long stretches, days, maybe even a week, enough to terrify neighbors. And guess what? Historians still argue over a set of 15th century sleep reports from this region, describing villagers who woke with no memory of months gone by. Some had lost weight, others gained it. Some woke with strange clarity, claiming to remember vivid, endless dreams. Were these cases exaggerated, real medical episodes, or something else? You kneel near the old stone bedding, A faint mineral smell rises from the ground, slightly sweet, slightly metallic. The cave breathes with almost rhythmic drafts, warm, then cold, then warm again, as if pulling you deeper with every shift. You imagine medieval villagers standing right where you are, watching a loved one sleep and fearing they might never wake. They left bread, herbs, even small carved charms beside the sleepers, hoping to guide them back. A few accounts insist the sleepers' hair grew slower, their nails barely changed, their skin stayed youthful. That part, modern researchers can't explain. But they theorize metabolic changes due to low oxygen environments could slow some bodily processes. You lean back against the wall. The cave hums faintly. You close your eyes for a moment just to listen. The air shifts. A soft hush. A subtle sway in the atmosphere, almost like someone breathing beside you. You open your eyes, and for a moment the cave seems narrower, shadows thicker, like a sleeping presence still lingers in the stone. Not threatening, just old. So old it forgot how to wake. You stand slowly and step toward the mouth of the cave. Moonlight pools on the ground outside, silver and calm. Behind you, the air exhales one last soft draft, brushing the back of your neck like a cold fingertip. You step out. Some legends come from monsters, some from miracles, and some, like the 7-year sleepers, come from the delicate threshold where nature blurs into mystery. You walk down the path, leaving the cave behind as the night opens into a quieter, safer darkness. You follow the limestone ridge westward, the night air warming again, as if the land wants to ease you out of the cave's strange, sleepy pull. The path slopes downward into a quieter quarter of medieval Spain, narrow streets of Barcelona that feels strangely hollow at this hour. Lamps flicker in iron brackets, laundry lines sway gently overhead. A single cat darts past you, pauses, and then stares into the shadows behind you like it sees something you don't. Great. Always comforting when animals decide to be dramatic. You arrive at a small plaza tucked between old stone buildings. A fountain sits in the center, dry at the moment, its basin cracked and moss-lined. A cold breeze slips around its edges, carrying with it the faint musk of alleyways and ocean air. This is where people in the Middle Ages whispered about the demon cat of Barcelona, a monstrous feline said to stalk the streets after midnight, larger than a wolf, with glowing eyes and claws sharp enough to gouge stone. According to frightened merchants and sleepless bakers, it roamed the Gothic quarter, let out unearthly screams, and devoured stray dogs whole. You know, normal cat things, just scaled up to nightmare mode. You step into a shadowed alley where irregular scratches scar the walls deep, parallel grooves that climb upward as if something huge leaped and dug in mid-flight. You place your fingers on the marks. The stone is cold, chipped. Anyone could argue these came from a tool or cart accident, but the pattern is uncanny. The medieval tales describe a creature nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, with a tail long enough to wrap around a grown man's leg. Locals insisted it wasn't a panther, because those weren't supposed to exist here. And yet, livestock disappeared, dogs vanished, corpses of horses were found with slashes too big and too precise to be wolves. This should sound impossible. Except here comes the historical twist. A mainstream scientific fact reveals that Spain was once home to the Iberian lynx, one of the largest wild cats in Europe. In the Middle Ages, it was more robust, longer limbs, heavier musculature, and capable of taking down surprisingly large prey. Fossil evidence shows some individuals reached enormous sizes, especially in northern and eastern Spain. Combine this with erratic behavior driven by famine, disease, or territorial stress, and you've got a cat that absolutely could terrify a medieval neighborhood. And now, here's where the legend becomes eyebrow-raising. In the late 20th century, excavations beneath Barcelona uncovered an unusually large lynx fossil bigger than any known modern Iberian lynx. The skull's jaw structure suggested a bite strong enough to crack small bones. Its claws, preserved in mineral deposits, measured longer than normal. This species wasn't a myth. It was real. Some researchers even think rare giants persisted into the medieval period. Historians still argue over that, naturally. You turn a corner into a deeper alley. The walls rise sharply, blotting out the moon. Sounds tick and skitter above you, pigeons shifting on ledges, wooden shutters creaking. And then, a low, guttural growl echoes from somewhere behind the fountain. You freeze. It doesn't sound like a house cat. more like someone dragging a bass string across gravel. Your pulse kicks up a notch, but you walk toward the sound anyway, because apparently we're brave now, or too invested to turn back. The fountain casts long shadows that twitch slightly with each breath of wind. You scan the square. Nothing. But medieval people swore the demon cat appeared in flashes there one moment, gone the next, moving too fast for torches to catch. They described yellow eyes that hung in the darkness like distant lanterns. Some said the creature had supernatural intelligence. Others insisted it was cursed by a local witch. One fringe tale even suggested it was the protector of hidden treasure buried beneath the city, though that sounds like someone got bored during wine season. You crouch near the fountain, noticing deep scratches around its basin. Again, maybe tools, maybe erosion, but the arrangement looks deliberate, almost like an enormous animal pawed at the stone while drinking. A quirky tidbit. Medieval Barcelona had entire streets dedicated to butchers and tanners. They threw scraps and offal into alleys at night, attracting all sorts of animals. Stray cats and dogs gathered in swarms. Wolves occasionally crept into the outskirts. And large lynxes, rare but possible, could have been drawn into the chaos for easy food. A giant feline lurking among the waste piles? Absolutely terrifying. You rise slowly and walk toward an old wooden door at the far end of the plaza. Its bottom edge is shredded into splinters, the kind produced by repeated clawing. Behind it, darkness swallows the tiny courtyard. You lean closer. A soft thud echoes from inside, followed by a sharp exhale. Then silence. Okay, that's definitely not a mouse. Modern biologists studying the lynx fossils compared claw spacing and found that several medieval scratch marks around Barcelona match the size and pattern of giant lynxes, not domestic cats or dogs. Which means medieval citizens weren't hallucinating, they were seeing a real, oversized apex predator. You take a slow step back. On the rooftop above you, two small reflective spots hover cat eyes, but unusually far apart, unusually high. A shape shifts, slinks, and then drops behind the ledge, disappearing with a soft thump. You don't chase it. You're not that brave. Also, you like your arms where they are. As you exit the plaza, the wind carries a faint screech, not quite a howl, not quite a yowl. Something in between. Something powerful. Something old. The demon cat may not have been demonic. But it was certainly no ordinary feline. And as you walk into the next stretch of night, the shadows behind you seem to stretch just a little longer, as if something big passed through them only moments ago. Barcelona's alleys shrink behind you as you drift northward, following the night's steady pull toward colder air and flatter ground. The scent changes, first salt giving way to damp soil, then to something sharp and bitter, like burned hair and wet wood. Clouds gather low and heavy overhead. The wind picks up in sudden, inconsistent bursts, each one carrying the faintest hint of smoke. You keep walking, boots tapping along an uneven path that slopes downward into a shallow valley. Ahead, faint gurgling sounds mix with the wind. Water. Running water. But there's another smell riding beside it. Acrid, chemical, unsettling in a way that almost tingles at the back of your throat. Welcome to the legend of the burning river of Dublin. You find yourself standing on the edge of a narrow riverbank, the moon breaking through the clouds, just enough to paint silver streaks across the slow-moving water. On the far side, reeds sway, dark and glossy. The river seems calm, benign, until a thin, oily sheen ripples across the surface, catching the light in iridescent swirls. You crouch at the edge and notice bubbles rising from the shallow's fat, sluggish bubbles that burst with a soft pop, releasing that bitter smell again. Medieval Dubliners swore this river was cursed. They told stories of flames bursting out of the water without warning, of smoke rising where no fire was present, of sparks dancing along the surface like mischievous spirits. Some claimed the river burned from within. Others insisted it was the work of fae or demons punishing the city for its sins. You dip a finger near the water close enough to feel the coolness, but definitely not touching that weird film floating on top. The smell intensifies, and suddenly you understand how terrifying this must have been in the Middle Ages. Imagine drawing water for cooking or washing and watching it ignite. The stories weren't subtle. One chronicle describes a night when the river lit itself as though touched by stars. Another mentions a fisherman who dropped a lantern from his boat. The river caught fire instantly, engulfing the boat in a ring of blue flame. People fled in panic, convinced the water spirits were rising. Time to ground it, A mainstream historical fact clarifies part of the mystery. Medieval Dublin's rivers were heavily polluted with flammable waste, especially from tanneries, slaughterhouses, and dye workshops. They dumped fats, oils, alcohol residues, and other byproducts directly into the water. Over time, these materials created a floating layer, thin but highly combustible. All it took was a stray spark from a torch, lantern, or blacksmith's workshop, and whoosh, water on fire. Terrifying, but not mystical. You walk along the Fynedy riverbank, tracing the shimmering trail of oil drifting down the current. In the moonlight, it almost looks alive, slithering, curling, shifting like a restless serpent. Medieval folks saw this too, and of course they assumed magic. One quirky tidbit claims locals believed the river formed a boundary between the human world and the other world, and that the fires were signs of war among Fey clans beneath the surface. Another tale says the river was cursed by a murdered monk whose blood turned the water to flame. You step over a broken stone wall and follow the river to a shallower bend. The water here flows more slowly, pooling against old wooden beams, remnants of medieval mills. You kneel beside one, brushing aside moss to reveal charred marks on the wood, long black streaks that look suspiciously like burn scars. Researchers have documented similar marks along several old riverside structures in Dublin, evidence that flames really did lick up from the water. As you walk farther, the smell changes again. Stronger, sharper, almost spicy. You recognize it now. Tanning agents. Medieval tanneries used animal fats, lime, urine, and flammable solutions. They dumped everything into nearby rivers. On hot days, fumes collected in pockets above the water, flammable pockets, combined with methane released from decomposing organic matter, instant fire hazard. And still, historians argue over an odd detail. Some medieval reports claim flames appeared even during heavy rain, when fumes would have been diluted. A few scholars suggest small underground fissures near the river released natural gas, which ignited when meeting the oily surface. Others think temperature inversions trapped vapors beneath a thin water layer, creating delayed combustion. Or maybe those chroniclers just loved drama. You reach a narrow footbridge. Beneath it, a thin tongue of flame suddenly rises. Just a flash, shimmering gold and vanishing before you can even gasp. You lean over the first railing and see a faint trail of bubbles rising from the riverbed. The oily film above them ripples outward. It's not supernatural, it's chemistry. But in the dark, with the wind howling softly and the moon tangled in clouds, the effect feels unmistakably magical. You move to the center of the bridge. The river continues its slow murmur below you, interrupted by the occasional pop of trapped gas breaking free. You imagine medieval Dubliners watching these flickers of fire, whispering prayers or fearfully tossing coins into the water. They didn't have the vocabulary for methane pockets or flammable tannery waste, so they concluded the river had a temper, or a soul, or both. You continue walking, and the smell finally thins out as you put distance between yourself and the polluted bend. Behind you, the river gurgles one last time like someone clearing their throat in warning, then settles back into quiet darkness. Not every medieval legend hides a monster. Some hide a chemistry experiment gone horribly wrong. You step away from the burning river, letting the night carry you toward the next strange truth waiting just beyond the horizon. You leave Dublin's smouldering waters behind, letting the bitter tang of chemical fire fade from your senses as you drift northeast. The land rises and stretches into a wide, rolling expanse where forests thicken, winds sharpen, and the night air carries a strange clarity, like the world is exhaling something ancient. Ahead, a faint rhythmic sound drifts through the trees. Not laughter, not quite. More like a low, booming rumble, deep, chesty, and oddly cheerful, as if someone the size of a barn is trying not to laugh while hiding behind a hill. Welcome to the Baltic lands of Samogitia, where medieval villagers told tales of the laughing giants, towering figures who roamed the forests, shook the earth with their footsteps, and filled the night with thunderous mirth. These weren't malevolent beings. Villagers feared them but also respected them, believing the giants protected sacred groves and ancient stone circles hidden deep in the woods. You step onto a pine-lined trail. The trees here are tall, straight, and unnervingly symmetrical, like soldiers standing at attention. Moonlight filters through the branches in pale vertical stripes. Far ahead, the earth dips into a shallow glade, where the grass grows taller than your knees. The rumble comes again, longer this time, rolling through the soil under your boots, You freeze. Then you smile despite yourself. It's just thunder. Probably. Medieval people in Samogitia often mistook distant thunder for the laughter of giants, but here's where things get interesting. They weren't entirely wrong about giants, just the wrong kind. You enter the clearing, and at its center lies a cluster of ancient burial mounds. Long, smooth humps rising from the earth, overgrown with wildflowers and moss. You walk toward the nearest one and place your hand on its surface. The grass is cool and slightly damp. Beneath it lies a grave dating back over 1,000 years, and inside, some of the tallest warriors ever recorded in early Baltic history. A mainstream historical fact anchors the legend. Excavations across Samogitia have revealed unusually tall human remains, some individuals standing between 6'4" and 6'8", extraordinary for the medieval period. These warriors belong to Baltic tribes known for exceptional height and strength, often recorded by crusaders as giant men who laugh at death. Well, if a group of towering fighters charged at you while laughing, you'd probably exaggerate too. You walk between the mounds. The air here feels dense, charged with old stories. Villagers insisted the giants loved gathering near stone circles to laugh loudly at night, rumbling, booming laughter that rolled across forests. They weren't destructive, just loud, enthusiastic, potentially oblivious to indoor voice etiquette. A quirky tidbit: some medieval chronicles describe these giants carrying logs like spears and hurling boulders for sport, claiming they trained by throwing stones across rivers. Archaeologists later discovered large stones deliberately placed along streams in Samogitia, likely ritual markers, but medieval imagination saw them as athletic accomplishments of giant heroes. You crouch by one such stone near the clearing's edge. It's large, too large for one average person to have moved alone, and worn smooth on one side as if it were once rolled or handled frequently. When moonlight hits its surface, faint chisel marks appear, spiraling in patterns that look decorative, ceremonial, or possibly just someone showing off. As you stand again, the wind shifts, bringing with it another low rumble, longer, more rounded, almost like a drawn-out laugh. You glance at the sky. Clouds churn overhead, their edges tearing in the wind. Thunder again. But the timing is uncanny. It rolls across the treetops like someone dragging a giant drumstick across the heavens. Historians still argue whether the giant legend came solely from tall warriors, or if acoustic tricks in the Baltic forests amplified sounds to enormous proportions. Dense pine forests can echo thunder for miles, stretching and bending the sound until it resembles laughter moving through the tree line. Add campfires, fear, and creative storytelling. Instant giants. You wander deeper, following a narrow stream that cuts through the clearing. Its banks are lined with stones carved with symbols, swirls, spirals, sun wheels. Offerings from centuries ago. Prayers for good harvests, safe hunts, or protection. Villagers believed the laughing giants guarded the forest, discouraging invaders by booming with joy rather than growling with anger. A very wholesome intimidation tactic. But there's one more piece of the legend, a fringe detail that scholars debate fiercely. Several medieval sources mention giant bones displayed in village halls. Most of these were later identified as mammoth or aurochs fossils, but a few, surprisingly human. Thick femurs, long humeri, robust rib cages. Whether they belong to a population of extraordinarily large Samogitian warriors or rare genetic outliers, no one agrees. You reach another mound larger, more pronounced than the rest. Its grassy top ripples in the breeze like a sleeping animal's back. You rest your hand on it. A soft vibration passes through the earth, not supernatural, just the thunder's distant rumble. But for a second, the mound feels warm, alive, breathing slowly under the weight of centuries. You step back. The clouds shift. A bolt of distant lightning flickers. Then the rumble comes again, deep, rolling, layered with echoes bouncing across the woods. If you didn't know better, you could swear it sounds like laughter. Not mocking, not cruel, just enormous. You smile and continue walking. The forest whispers behind you, the mounds settling into shadow. Some legends come from fear, others from misunderstanding. But the laughing giants? They came from memory, tall men, loud voices, thunderclaps, echoes, and the human urge to turn awe into story. You walk toward the next rise of land, leaving the rumbling glade behind as the night gently nudges you onward. You leave the Baltic forests behind as the thunder-soft laughter fades into the night. The land flattens, the trees thin, and soon distant lanterns flicker like low-hanging stars across a quiet Italian valley. Siena rises ahead, medieval, steep, woven from brick and shadow. Its narrow streets twist like veins toward a beating heart, the old hospital complex where rumors once crept through every corridor. Tonight, you walk into the story of the bone harvesters of Siena. The wind shifts as you enter the city's oldest quarter. It carries the dry scent of dust, old parchment, and faint traces of iron, an unmistakable note that clings to places steeped in medical history. Siena was home to some of the first organized hospitals in Europe, and while they provided care and charity, they also produced something their physicians desperately needed: bodies to study. A medieval problem. Bodies were scarce. Knowledge was scarcer. Curiosity overflowing. So when the whispers began, shadowy figures stealing bones from cemeteries, emptying fresh graves, and leaving nothing behind, it didn't take long for Siena to develop one of its most chilling urban legends. You step through a narrow archway and find yourself in a courtyard paved with worn red bricks. Moonlight paints long stripes across the ground. A stone well sits at the center, dry, silent, its rim etched with grooves from centuries of rope and bucketware, but the real story lies beneath your boots. The bone harvesters, people said, were cloaked men who prowled at night, gathering skeletons for forbidden anatomical study. Some tales described them as monks, others as students. Some swore they were spirits, summoned by physicians who wanted knowledge the church refused to authorize. And a few villagers insisted that if you walked past the cemetery after midnight, you could hear the rattling of bones in sacks slung over silent shoulders. You step toward the shadows beneath the hospital arches. The air grows colder, heavier, more deliberate. Something about this place remembers. Now for the grounding reality. A mainstream historical fact reveals that in the 14th and 15th centuries, Siena became a hub for early anatomy. The Hospital of Santa Maria della Scala, just steps from where you now stand, trained some of Europe's first professional medical workers. And yes, they needed bodies to learn from. But obtaining them, that part was complicated. Officially, the hospital used bodies of the poor, unclaimed, or executed. Unofficially, some documents hint at nighttime collections. A ledger from the 1472nd lists skeletal remains delivered from the hillside, without specifying how. Letters from a physician complain about the lack of specimens and request any available bones, intact preferred. Not exactly incriminating, but suspiciously vague. You slip into a side corridor where smooth plaster walls glow faintly white under the moon. A long crack runs across the floor, thin, almost straight. You crouch. Your fingers brush against small indentations. Marks, like something heavy was dragged repeatedly across this very path. You stand again, listening. The corridor breathes soft drafts slipping through unseen cracks. A faint creak echoes behind you. You turn, but nothing stirs. A quirky tidbit. Medieval physicians sometimes boiled bodies to separate bones for study. They did this in hidden courtyards or underground chambers, far from curious eyes. The bone harvester's legend likely grew from villagers smelling these strange processes, burning fat, boiling water, odd herbal mixtures used to mask the scent. Imagine walking past a hospital at night and catching a whiff of something that definitely wasn't soup. No wonder people whispered. You descend a short staircase into a stone chamber beneath the hospital. The ceiling arches low, each brick meticulously arranged by medieval masons. The floor has a shallow depression in the center like a basin. This, according to surviving documents, was where hospital workers washed bodies and stripped them for burial. But the legend insists something else happened here. Villagers claimed cloaked figures laid bones on the floor, sorting them by type. Femurs in one pile, skulls in another, ribs lined up like xylophone bars. They said these bones glowed faintly under lantern light because the harvesters rubbed them with herbs, oils, and strange balms to prepare them for knowledge. You run your hand across the stone basin. It's smooth. Too smooth. Centuries of scraping, cleaning, and other activities wore this surface down. Faint grooves remain, curved and shallow, like the ghosts of ancient tools. Now the fringe twist. During a 1,990 seconds excavation beneath this very hospital, Archaeologists uncovered piles of disarticulated bones not buried in graves, not arranged as ossuaries, but scattered with cuts and scraping marks. They were old, medieval. Many showed signs of precise incisions consistent with early anatomical study. Historians still argue whether these remains were simply discarded cadavers, or whether Siena's physicians really did rely on something closer to procurement. You step deeper into the chamber, the air tightening as though the room shrinks around you. A soft drip echoes from a corner. The walls hold stains too faint to identify. You imagine medieval assistants moving quietly here, lanterns swinging, shadows gliding across stone. Above ground, the legend says the bone harvesters moved silently, without footsteps, that they tapped on windows of houses with sick children, asking if the family wanted a blessing. Some stories insisted the harvesters could sense imminent death appearing in the streets hours before someone passed. Their presence alone was considered an omen. You climb back to the courtyard. The wind is warmer now, slipping around the arches like a tired breath. You pause at the well and peer down. Darkness. A dry hollow. But some say bones were dropped here too, lowered into the depths to hide them from authorities. A chill courses through you despite the warm breeze. You pick up a piece of old pottery near the well, a broken shard with soot along the edge. Burn marks, perhaps from a lantern, perhaps from something else. You set it down again. The bone harvesters were never proven to exist as a formal group. But evidence suggests someone was doing the work. Someone needed those bones. Someone walked these streets at night. You leave the courtyard, feeling every shadow watching you slip away. Some legends grow from fear, some from necessity, and some from the quiet spaces where medicine, morality, and mystery overlap. The night deepens, and another truth waits ahead. You leave Siena's shadowed courtyards behind, letting the stone arches shrink into the night as you follow a colder wind toward open coast. The land shifts again, hills flatten, air sharpens, and the sky opens wide above you, like a dark sail stretched across the horizon. Soon you hear it, the low, steady roar of waves, a rhythm older than any legend, pulling you toward the northern sea where ships vanish, storms speak, and sailors swear the water remembers everything. Tonight, you walk straight into the chilling tale of the phantom ship of the North Sea. The wind stiffens as you reach a jagged stretch of coastline, dark cliffs, slick with spray, jutting like broken teeth into the water. Below, the ocean churns in slow, heavy swells, each one cresting with pale foam that glows faintly under the moon. You descend a narrow path carved into the cliff face and step onto a deserted strand. The sand is coarse, cold, and littered with driftwood. Then far offshore you see it. A shape, long, dark, drifting silently through the mist. A medieval cog, by the look of it, broad hull, upright prow, single mast tattered like a ragged toothpick against the sky. The vessel moves without sails, without oars, without crew, just gliding forward as if pulled by a current no one else can see. This is exactly how the legends describe it. A ship that appeared in fog before storms, drifting unnervingly close to shore, its deck empty except for coils of rope, and occasionally, some said, a single lantern swinging with no visible flame. Sailors called it the Wandering Bride, though no one agrees why. Some claimed the ship belonged to a drowned bridegroom. Others insisted the vessel itself was married to death. You watch the silhouette drift sideways, unnaturally straight, unnaturally steady. No rocking, no pitching, just smooth, almost gliding. The air chills against your skin as a faint, low groan rolls across the water, the sound of wood under pressure. Old wood, tired wood. A mainstream historical fact grounds this ghost story. The North Sea produced countless unmanned drift ships over the centuries, especially during storms or pirate attacks. Ships with damaged rudders or broken masts could be set adrift for months, even years. The cold preserved hulls unnaturally well, making them appear weirdly intact when they washed ashore. Fishermen sometimes saw these vessels gliding eerily close in low wind momentum, carried by longshore currents. But the creepier part? Many of these ships really were found completely empty. No crew, no cargo, no explanation. You step closer to the waterline. A thick mist creeps toward shore like fingers dragging across the sea surface. You notice faint lights flickering inside the fog, not lanterns, just reflections from the moon and waves. Still, your brain insists, those look like deck lights. You blink them away. Medieval chronicles describe sightings where sailors swore the phantom ship sailed straight through other vessels, passing through wood and rigging as if it were smoke. More likely, visibility distortions made distances impossible to judge. Fog bends light in ways medieval mariners didn't understand. But the legend grows stranger, a quirky tidbit. In 1423, fishermen near Jutland claimed the phantom ship carried a mast that turned slowly against the wind, creaking with a rhythmic groan. Modern historians suggest they witnessed a wrecked cog whose mast was broken at the base and rotated freely with wave motion. 2. Terrified fishermen at dusk? That looked like possession. You walk along the beach as the drifting ship fades slightly behind a curtain of fog, only to reappear seconds later in an entirely different position. Your pulse jumps. A trick of the mist? Probably. The North Sea's fog layers can create multiple ghost images of objects, like mirages on land. A ship might appear in 3 places at once, or nearer than it truly is. Historians still argue whether the phantom ship sightings were these optical illusions or genuine. Derelict vessels wandering dangerously into fishing zones. The wind picks up. You pull your coat tight. Then you hear it. A faint clanging, like a loose metal hook tapping against wood. You scan the ship again. It's closer now. Too close, yet still unnervingly silent. No splashing from the bow. No fluttering sails. Just the steady, creeping advance of something empty. A swell rises. The ship lifts, then settles with a resonant groan that echoes across the cove. You feel it in your teeth. You step back toward the dunes. One fringe theory adds a colder layer. Some believe certain unmanned ships became so waterlogged that they rode low and quiet, producing minimal wake. Their keels cut through fog soundlessly, creating the illusion of a ghostly glide. Others maintain that a few vessels became natural echo chambers, producing deep, hollow moans with wind pressure alone. Medieval people assumed those groans were human souls trapped aboard. You brush your fingers across a piece of driftwood. It's soft, worn, but carries faint tar residue, the scent sharp and ancient. You toss it aside and turn back to the sea. The phantom ship is fading again, not sinking, just dissolving into the mist. Its outline blurs. The mast vanishes first, then the hull melts into shadow, then nothing. You stand still, listening. Only the waves remain, breaking against rocks with indifferent rhythm. You exhale slowly. The thing about phantom ships is simple. Sometimes they're abandoned wrecks, sometimes they're tricks of fog and light, and sometimes they're real vessels drifting through darkness long after their stories have ended. You turn away from the sea, leaving the lingering shape of the ship, whether real or imagined, to continue its silent voyage into the night. You leave the coastline behind, the last hint of salt fading from your tongue as you walk inland again. The air thickens not unpleasantly, but with a kind of expectant weight, like the night is holding its breath. Hills rise and fall beneath your boots until you find yourself standing before an ancient fortress wall, high, jagged, and lit by the trembling glow of distant torches. Carcassonne. Even at night, the citadel looks unreal, its double ring of towers standing like a row of waiting sentinels, each one sharpening the darkness. You walk beneath a stone archway so old it feels like it might remember your footsteps before you take them. The path slopes upward toward the main gate. A tall, narrow passage flanked by 2 conical towers. The wind squeezes through it in a thin, whining thread. And then you hear it. A cry. Not human, not animal, not wind. Something in between. Welcome to the legend of the Screaming Gate of Carcassonne. You step closer. The gate looms above you, its wooden doors braced with thick iron bands. The hinges look prehistoric, huge, dark, corroded in places. But it's the sound rising from the arch that curls around your spine. A long, sharp wail vibrates through the stone, followed by a soft, flute-like note that almost sounds melodic, as if something inside the wall is singing and suffering at the same time. Medieval residents swore the gate screamed whenever danger approached. Sieges, storms, plagues. It didn't matter. The gate announced them all. People believed the cries came from a woman buried alive inside the wall, a punishment, a sacrifice, a tragedy lost to time. Others insisted the keening voice belonged to a spirit who protected the fortress, warning its people with her agonized wail. Some even placed flowers and garlands near the arch to appease her. The sound became part of the night here, expected, feared, and oddly comforting. You place your hand on the cold stone. A vibration hums beneath your palm, thin, resonant, trembling like the plucked string of an instrument. The wind whistles again, and the gate screams, a sharp rising note that makes your shoulders tense. Time to separate legend from reality. A mainstream historical fact reveals that medieval fortifications sometimes incorporated wind harps, rudimentary wooden or metal slats, fitted into narrow openings that produced eerie sounds when the wind passed through them. Carcassonne's main gate, strategically positioned in a natural wind corridor, was an ideal acoustic chamber. Restoration teams in the 20th century discovered remnants of strange notches and slots carved into the stonework, positioned exactly where air pressure spikes. Meaning, the gate was designed intentionally or accidentally to sing. And its song? Well, it's terrifying. You step beneath the arch. The sound intensifies instantly, bouncing off the curved ceiling, ricocheting around you in long, drawn-out notes that shift unpredictably. 1 second, a shriek. The next, a sigh. Then a moan that vibrates deep in your chest like a haunted cello. You move deeper inside. The temperature drops. A gust slices through the passage, sharp and sudden. The gate screams again, longer now. Louder, like someone dragging their nails down a stone wall. You swallow carefully. Totally fine. Totally normal. Just medieval musical architecture being extra. A quirky tidbit from local legend says that if you stand under the gate at midnight and shout your name, the fortress will answer by screaming back the final syllable. Ridiculous, of course. So naturally, you're tempted to try it. But the smart part of your brain reminds you that waking an entire medieval citadel with an acoustic challenge is how horror movies start. Instead, you explore the gatehouse interior. A spiral staircase curls upward along the right-hand wall. You ascend slowly, each step echoing with soft, hollow thuds. The upper chamber smells faintly of damp wood and old iron. Here, small arrow slits pierce the walls, thin vertical gaps that funnel the wind into the perfect shape for producing those unsettling tones. You lean toward one slit. A thin gust blasts through it, and you hear it clearly this time. Not a scream, but a chord. A full, resonant note vibrating through the stone like the fortress is humming to itself. Modern acousticians have studied this gate. Some argue the screaming effect is purely environmental wind speed, plus slit geometry plus tunnel acoustics. Others insist the medieval builders intentionally tuned the structure to intimidate enemies. A few fringe researchers even propose that certain slits were carved precisely to mimic human vocal frequencies. And yes, historians still argue bitterly over whether the fortress was built to shriek or whether it screamed by accident. You descend the stairs again, stepping back into the gateway where the night air flows freely. The wind shifts suddenly, one violent gust, and the gate emits its longest wail yet. It's so human that your instincts force you to take a step back. The sound rises, breaks, falls, then dissolves into a soft, breathy exhale. A moment of silence follows, then another gust, another cry. You look up at the towers, dark, silent, unmoving. The sky above them churns with clouds, drifting slowly past the moon. Somewhere deeper in the castle, a torch flares. You turn to leave the gate, and as you walk down the sloping path, a final, sharp shriek pierces the darkness behind you like a warning, or a farewell, or just another gust taking the scenic route through the fortress's throat. You don't look back. Some legends feel truer when you leave them behind. The night stretches onward, and one last story waits for you just beyond the shadows. You leave Carcassonne's screaming gate behind, its last echo fading into the distance, like a frayed ribbon unraveling into the dark. The night grows deeper, quieter, softer an exhale after all the proper, wailing stone. You follow a lonely road that curves between fields silvered with dew. The air feels heavier now, but not ominous, more like it's filled with anticipation, the calm before a final curtain rise. The land flattens. The stars brighten. And ahead, perched alone on a grassy knoll, stands a tiny stone chapel, long abandoned, half swallowed by ivy. A single narrow window glows faintly with reflected starlight. The wooden door hangs crooked, one hinge rusted clean through. This was once a place of reading, copying, learning. But it's the legend connected to this place that pulls you in. The manuscript that wrote itself. You push the door open. It groans a deep, reluctant sound like a tired librarian who's just been woken up. Inside, the chapel is small, quiet, and strangely warm. Dust drifts lazily in the moonlight pouring through the window. A cracked lectern stands near the far wall, and atop it lies a book thick, bound in leather that looks older than half the first. Stories you've told tonight. Your footsteps echo gently as you approach. The air smells of parchment, beeswax, and something faintly metallic ink maybe. Or something that wants to be ink. The medieval tale was simple and terrifying. Monks claimed this manuscript wrote new pages overnight. Sentences appeared where blank parchment had been. Ink shimmered even though no monk had touched a quill. Some believed the book was cursed. Others said it contained divine messages. A few simply left the abbey rather than sleep near it. You rest your fingers on the leather cover. It's warm. That can't be right. A soft vibration hums beneath your hand. You open the book. The pages are yellowed, slightly curled at the edges. The handwriting is delicate, yet hurried, thin strokes, dense lines, crammed margins. You flip to a blank page. The parchment is smooth, untouched. You rub your thumb across it. Just paper. Yet the monks swore that if they left a sheet blank overnight, it filled with text by morning, strange diagrams, astronomical symbols, herbal recipes no one recognized. They blamed spirits, or angels, or demons, or one especially overworked novice. Time for the grounding reality. A mainstream historical fact reveals that several European monasteries, including ones near Carcassonne and Toulouse, experimented with early nocturnal ink techniques. These inks reacted to humidity and temperature changes, sometimes blooming hours after application. A scribe might write faintly before sleep, believing the ink didn't take only for it to darken completely by dawn. Voila! Self-writing book. But this specific manuscript had quirks. You flip deeper. Here, a diagram of two overlapping circles. Alchemy symbols. Maybe. There, a sketch of a plant that looks almost like lavender, except the leaves curl in unnatural angles. You notice faint shimmer on one page, like wet ink reflecting light, except the surface is entirely dry. A quirky tidbit. Analysis of some medieval inks reveals traces of bioluminescent fungi, spores, accidental contamination from storage in damp rooms. Under certain conditions, manuscripts appeared to glow faintly, especially at night. Imagine being a medieval monk, waking up at 2 a.m., seeing your book softly glowing like it ate fireflies, and choosing emotional breakdown over scientific deduction. And yet, the legend goes deeper. Some scribes insisted the manuscript wrote things they did not know, languages they'd never studied, diagrams too complex for their training. Historians still argue whether these claims were exaggerations, misinterpretations, or the result of multiple scribes adding pages in secret. A few even propose the book was a communal notebook passed anonymously between curious monks. You trace a symbol with your finger. It's smooth, almost polished by time. Then you hear it, a faint scratching. You freeze, soft, slow, rhythmic. Your eyes snap to the corner of the room. Nothing. Your gaze returns to the book. The scratching continues. You lean closer. It's coming from inside the wall, behind the alcove where scribes once stored ink pots. You take a step toward it. The sound stops instantly. Silence thickens. Then, a moment later, the manuscript's page curls slightly, as if touched by a breeze, though the air is dead still. You rest your palm above it. No draft, no wind. You turn back a few pages. Fresh ink? Impossible. And yet, thin lines fainter than spider silk stretch across the parchment, as though still settling. You know it's just chemical reaction, ink oxidizing, ambient moisture doing its thing. Probably. Mostly. A fringe theory adds a delightful sprinkle of madness. Some modern researchers believe certain inks contain trace minerals sensitive to lunar illumination, meaning when moonlight hit the page at specific angles, invisible writing became visible like a medieval photocopy trick. Imagine the monks discovering that. Terrifying. Magical. Both. You close the manuscript gently. The warmth beneath your hand fades like a heartbeat slipping into sleep. The chapel grows quieter. Dust settles. The night feels softer now, like the world is finally giving you permission to rest after this long travel through legends. But before you leave, you notice something carved into the lectern tiny, almost hidden beneath centuries of scratches. Scriptum vigilat. The writing watches. You exhale slowly. A little dramatic, sure, but fitting. You step outside. The door creaks closed behind you. The manuscript sits in the moonlit silence, its pages still, its ink dark and quiet. For now, the night deepens, settling around you like a blanket, and your journey through medieval truth and myth drifts toward its final chapter, a gentle fade into stillness. You walk away from the chapel, letting the quiet embrace you as the land softens under your steps. The air loses its sharp edges. The night, once filled with voices, whispers, screams, and soft murmurs of forgotten places, stretches into something calm and wide. Each breath you take feels slower now, warmer, the kind of breath that signals the world has exhaled with you, the kind that invites your shoulders to drop just a little more with every step. Stars hang above like distant lanterns, unhurried in their glow. Even the wind seems to move differently, gentler, brushing past you as though careful not to wake anything that has finally settled. The path fades into a soft blur of shadow and silver mist. You don't need to see clearly anymore. You're simply walking forward, letting the darkness cradle your thoughts. Those legends you crossed, monks who drift through ruins, stones that sing, forests that whisper, wells that breathe warm air, all of them shrink into comforting shapes now. Nothing sharp, nothing urgent, just memories, softened by distance. The world feels quieter for knowing them. You feel quieter too. Somewhere far behind, a bell might ring once. A page might shift in a forgotten manuscript. A ship might glide beyond the horizon. But none of it reaches you here. Not really. It's all melted into the night, leaving only a soft hum where stories once stood tall. You breathe in, you breathe out. Slow, steady, easy. Let the weight slip from your muscles. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on quiet water. The night holds you, and there is nothing left to chase.